NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell, he wants players to stand during the national anthem. Now, at the owners' meeting scheduled for next week, they could put in a rule requiring just that. Dallas Cowboys owner Jerry Jones, he took it one step further, threatening to bench players. Here he is.
I had hoped that this issue would kind of subside and go away. If you do not honor and stand for the flag, then you won't play.
Now, if you say to yourself, isn't that the same guy? You'd be right. Jerry Jones, a couple of weeks ago, he took a knee with his team before the anthem as a show of solidarity. Now he'll bench anyone for doing the same action. So the question is, can the players be forced to stand? Now, I want to read from the standard player contract. In it, they pledge to, quote, conduct himself, on and off the field with appropriate recognition of the fact that the success of professional football depends largely on public respect for and approval of those associated with the game. Now, another clause says the contract could be terminated if the player, quote, has engaged in personal conduct reasonably judged by club to adversely affect or reflect on club. So the question is, can vague wording like that be enforceable? Let's put it on the table. This is a private enterprise, okay?
Supposedly.
Okay. But the shoulds and the coulds mean two different things to two different people.
Absolutely.
My question is, take ethics out of this, take morality or racial components out of it, just the law for a minute, guys. Can a private employer, we don't have to salute the flag when we go to work every day, but can an NFL player be either benched or terminated if he does not stand for the flag because the owners will stipulate that it's harming the product if he does not?
Well, it's another situation where they don't have generally a right to be, a lot of them don't have a right to play in the first place. So they could be benched or they could be terminated. The contract you may have to pay out. But they could have done that in the first place without articulating a reason. So you may have a star quarterback and decide not to play that person ever again. Well, that's an issue. That's contractual, and at that point you have to look to determine whether it's not too vague, and I think that it would be void for vagueness. But the thing I would love to see is I'd love to see Tom Brady and all the other top stars in the NFL who maybe don't even know why they're taking a knee to begin with, take a knee, and then let them fire all those guys, and you watch the NFL go away.
That's the practicality of this. Jerry Jones, if his whole offensive line took a knee, what's he going to do? But, Mark, before I get to the practicalities, what is your reading of the labor agreement and what is allowed of the employer? Because I'll give you a perfect scenario that could happen. What if somebody stands, but they do a Black Power salute, okay?
As they did in the NHL, to my chagrin and shock on Saturday night.
Okay,
yes.
But my point is, they're standing. Aren't we getting, by definition, into vagaries in terms of where is the line, who shall decide?
There are vagaries. So let's just break this down three ways, and we've done this on the program a bunch of times before. Take the First Amendment out of it because it's a restriction on government behavior. They have no First Amendment right to do this, number one. Number two, if it were an ordinary private employer, there's no doubt that an ordinary private employer could impose these restrictions on its employees. This is the third point, no ordinary private employer because it's subject to the collective bargaining process, so it's a matter of the contract between the union and the league. And to this degree, I agree with Mayo. It's very, very vague. It would have to be, certainly the clubs could take disciplinary action. The league, the NFLPA in this case, would file a grievance. Then it would be arbitrated. Query who does the arbitration. Roger Goodell did the arbitration last time, not exactly a neutral arbiter. Ultimately, it would probably end up in court, much like Deflategate, and somebody would have to decide. Practically, how's this going to work? It would have to be the subject of collective bargaining and a new agreement that spells out more precisely what the players' rights and obligations are in respect of this, because after all, it's one more thing they can bargain on.
But what if a player, because let's say it's a component to a job, I can think of limited vocations where you're required to have the national anthem and your performance or attention to as part of your job. It wasn't always the case in the NFL. This is a recent phenomenon, blah, blah, blah. What if a player stays in the locker room and then comes out? Well, again, I'm not clear the enforceability, I think you laid it out really well, but how can they define the line?
Well, they're letting them stay in. They've made clear that they're going to be permitted to stay in the locker room and not come out. What's not going to be tolerated by the league. And by the way, I'm not taking the league side in this. They're a pack of hypocrites if they wanted to put their money where their mouths are. I mean, one week they're out there protesting with them. Now they see that the public is turning against them, so they want to stop the protest. You want to put your money where your mouth is, hire Colin Kaepernick back. At least he gave the money back to the community. But they're letting them have that breathing space to go into the locker room and make a silent protest. In respect of the two provisions that you put up on the screen before, number 2 I don't think applies. That's clearly personal conduct. That means off the field conduct. Number 1, and this goes back to Kennesaw Mountain Landis, 1919, the Black Sox baseball, conduct unbecoming to the league against the league's financial interests, so vague, so broad, the commissioner can really interpret that in the way that he wants to. The only exception would be, and I'll give Doug the floor in just 1 minute, if this were a First Amendment protected constitutional right, I think the commissioner would have a problem. But as we just explained, this is not a First Amendment issue.
You know, I think it is. It may be a First Amendment
How's that?
issue.
Because of the tax breaks?
Well, you know, you look at the way they treat the Commerce Clause. They kind of bend over backwards to make it fit so that everything's kind of federal action. And you look here and you look at the president has made a statement. With this case, he's sort of interjected himself. He's taken a political position and he's put it into a private enterprise. And these, if you look at the football game now, most of the game is advertisements for the military, army. They have actual, there's almost a crossover between the league and the government. I think you could make that argument. I don't know if it works, but
I don't think it works because, first of all, the president will say that he was doing it in response to Kaepernick. And look, I agree with you. These clubs are getting stadiums funded by taxpayer dollars, and there's no doubt that an enterprising plaintiff's lawyer could find government subsidies and public monies being expended for the benefit of the league, and somebody would make a state
But
action
the
argument.
tax status is a thing of the past, in that the threat of the president was an empty one because it's no longer, it could have been years ago, but it's not now.
But Green Bay's owned by the public.
Correct?
So that's not a private
Different.
institution,
But
so First Amendment should apply there.
And
or-
here's
No,
just
but
the
it's not a
funniest
government
part-
institution.
the
It's
funniest
owned
part
by
of
you
all
and me,
this
the
is,
citizen stockholders.
if you go back, what re-triggered this issue? It was fading. The president said,
He was
fire
very
the
smart politically.
SOBs,
He was very-
and
it was a
then
good issue for
2
him.
weeks later, you saw what the vice president did. So I don't know how this will turn out. We're going to find out more on Sunday, that's for sure. But interesting, guys. All right, when we come back, a dramatic day with major developments at the Menendez corruption trial today. We've got reports from the courthouse. Our Dominic Carter's there. Details as it relates to the New Jersey senator's case. Could the case be dismissed? Well, it's not that crazy a question. We'll get into that after this.